YOLO, amazing people of the tube. So I want to talk to you guys about the actual universal language. I believe that there is a universal language that all intelligent species will eventually find. And I don't think we've found it. And what is the universal language, right? I have many theories. This is something I've worked on, I've thought about for over a decade, and it's all theories and ideas because it doesn't, no one's found it, right? Now, what is language, for example, right? So language, us humans, we vocalize language, but language is also written, right? We write down things in symbols or represent symbols that represent sounds. So sounds are a language, right? Like birds singing is a language, whales, dogs, cats, right? So music can be a language, colors can be a language, right? All it is a form of communication. But what would a universal language be like, right? And this is the simplest way I can try and explain it. If an alien species from a completely different galaxy came to ours and we are trying to communicate, what do we use to communicate, right? And we hear this bullshit about, oh, math is the universal language. And no, math is the universal measuring stick. It's not the universal language. So what I've ran across in my search for trying to construct at least the beginning parts of the universal language is, first you have geometry, right? You have shapes. It's universal. Shapes are universal, right? Geometry, the basic concepts of geometry. And then you have the periodic table of elements, right? So you have all these elements, and then you have the isotopes. So now you have vibration, frequency, electromagnetism. You have order of construction, right? You have not only a spectrum of sound, but a spectrum of color, right? Because every element has its own vibrational frequency in both sound and in color. And mind you, when I say in color, like we humans, we don't perceive the entire spectrum of light, right? We only perceive a certain amount. We're colorblind essentially. So what does it look like? My guess is, and my what I've been working on is incorporating geometry, incorporating the concept of basic numbers, and incorporating the periodic table of elements into each other, right? So you have even things like sacred geometry, and all sacred geometry is geometry and this old concept of geometry that's been passed down to us, right? Like certain shapes and designs. That's all sacred geometry is, which symbolizes a whole bunch of information in a very simple image, which can be viewed as a form of communication, right? It's like a memory stick. So if you can imagine a picture symbolizing a whole bunch of information, right? A very simple picture. Let's say like the yin yang, right? Imagine if the yin yang actually holds thousands of ideas within itself. It's not just a yin yang, right? So when you combine all these things, there needs to be an order, and that's the order I've been trying to figure out. So I've been trying to figure out, so, and mind you, like, I'm going off the top of my head, and it's hard to put all this into context because I can't show you, right? And even if I do show you, I'm still gonna have to jump around like a crazy person, and like I have ADHD like a motherfucker, right? And you have to try and bear with it because, so imagine the periodic table of elements that we use, right? The blocky periodic table. Well, that's not sufficient. That's a very horrible representation of what the periodic table is. Not to mention that it's like a neutered version of the periodic table, because every element has isotopes, right? And a lot of people aren't even aware of this. And what is an isotope? So every element, there's multiple versions of the same element. And there's like radioactive decay. So there's stability and instability. And every element has stable and unstable versions of itself. And the periodic table we use, they consist of all the stable ones of each element, right? But that doesn't, but you're discounting a whole bunch of elements, like they're missing. So the modern periodic table goes up to element 118, okay, which is oganesson. Now, I know I butchered that name, but fucking, there's over 3,000 isotopes. So imagine, we're only seeing 118 out of over 3,000. So the periodic table, the way it's organized, it's horrible. It's horrible. And the numbers, they're just a median number. It's not the actual weight of the element. They take all the isotopes and then they find the median average, and that's the number they post up. But each isotope has its own unique weight, right? And that's why I'm saying it's a very neutered version of the periodic table. In my opinion, the periodic table is supposed to be circular. And so imagine if, like, you have hydrogen in the middle, the first element, and then like an onion ringed, right? So it's like the second element rings around as helium, and then the third element, and then the fourth. But each ring it represents one element in all its isotopes. So I've been trying to divide the periodic table in an onion-like fashion, right? And from there, try and build up into a language that can be easily communicated, right? And when you're talking about elements, you're also talking about numbers, and you're also talking about geometry. But you're also talking about sound waves and electromagnetism and frequency and color spectrums. So it encompasses a whole bunch of different things. It's not just one. And I think that's why it's the universal language. And I wish there was somebody out there who had more information than me, or had at least a desire to create the universal language. So, because I really do believe that every intelligent species, once we evolve to a certain point, we all stumble upon this universal language. It's like a universal truth, right? It's like basic physics, right? Physics is physics, no matter where you go in the universe. So there's certain constants, right? And I believe language is a constant. I'm gonna try and keep it at that, but I hope I was able to communicate what I'm trying to say. And I hope somebody out there actually leaves a comment about this and puts their idea or their perspective of this. Maybe you say something that'll help me out in trying to figure out this language, right? And it's ironic, like, I'm not very religious, but I always quote things from the Bible. So even in the Bible, right, like, people were building the Tower of Babel, and God came down and he said, I'm gonna confuse their language, right? And he made all these dialects and people couldn't communicate anymore. So imagine there was a point in time that everybody was speaking a singular language and everybody understood each other. And imagine this was around the time God was around, right? So he came and confused it. Now that's what the writings say, right? Now how true it is, if it's true, God exists, it doesn't matter. I just find it ironic that even in biblical text, there's a universal language or a hint of it. Or maybe that's just my biased conclusion. You know what I'm saying? Based on what I'm trying to achieve. So, I don't know. I'd love for you guys to leave a comment of your ideas and how a universal language might look like. Or even if there is one. You know? Solo Yolo Bolo. You guys have a nice day.